Hi, everybody. My name is Marika. I've been working at Centro Velo as our coordinator for this summer and a little bit into autumn. I'm here with you tonight with Tucker, who is a mechanic who's been helping me out the past couple of months. We both learned how to winter cycle in Montreal, and we've been at it for about 5 years now. So we're here with you with quite a bit of experience to share. And when I came to Montreal, I had never cycled in a city in general. So if you're feeling intimidated about starting your first season winter cycling, that's totally understandable. And I know where you're coming from. Hopefully some of the stuff that we share with you tonight will be helpful in making you feel less anxious about taking on your first season.
Like Mark said, I'm Tucker, and I've been volunteering with Centro Velo the last couple of months. Also started winter biking my first year at university, just with no idea what I was getting into. But as someone who liked biking, it was a continuation of riding in the summer, and I ended up loving it and have done it every winter since then. And I'm excited now to feel like I know enough that it's worth sharing. So.
Yeah, we're happy to be here with everyone, especially since we've had workshops in previous years that were in person, and we decided that we needed to have a workshop this year, especially since we're living in COVID times, because according to some of our Google forms, a lot of people are feeling that they might want to take on winter cycling because of not wanting to take the metro and public transit, and also just that we now have kind of an added need to move our bodies and get out of the house. So really happy to be here and still be doing this year. Just a couple of notes about the presentation. It's set into 3 different sections. The first one will be safety, the second one, dressing for the elements, and the third one will be covering some mechanical things. And also, if you're new to Zoom and the webinar, there's a question and answer function at the bottom of your screen it's like in a little banner. If you ever have a question while we're presenting, just feel free to type it out. And then at the end of each section, we'll get to answering the questions. Yeah.
And we'll also be flipping back and forth a little bit between sharing our screen just to have some text and pictures up for things to be clear. And then we'll switch back to our video at some points. At the end, the PowerPoint will be sent to everyone. So if there's links and stuff in there that you don't catch while we're moving through, you'll be able to get all that afterwards as well.
Cool. So for the first part, we're going to show our slideshow. And these are the items that we're going to cover in this section. So route planning, choosing between bike lanes and roads, managing your anxiety, braking and turning, and cycling through different types of snow. So first up is planning your route. My rule of thumb for winter cycling is that I pretty much always add 10 or 15 minutes onto my commute. And of course it varies depending on how long your commute is, but basically you should just be aware that you're gonna have to bike a little bit more slowly and you have to add that time so that you're not showing up late to places. And also it can be good to stick to routes that you know pretty well, because as we know, Montreal is filled with potholes, and I swear that you will get like pretty accustomed to knowing where they are. And when the streets are filled with snow and ice, it can be kind of difficult to see what's beneath all of that. So by sticking to a route that you're pretty familiar with, you kind of start to memorize where the worst sections of the road are.
Where the potholes are.
Yeah, where the potholes are. And we all know from biking around in the summer that there are lots, unfortunately. A really common question that we've received from our respondents and participants tonight is whether or not they should choose to take a bike lane or a road. Each has their pro and their con. Roads are a bit more intimidating. However, they're more reliably cleared in the wintertime sometimes. And bike lanes, of course, are more protected, so they can be a little bit less scary, but you just have to keep in mind that they can sometimes be a little bit slower to clear them. And some of the secondary bike lanes can be pretty messy.
This is just a screen capture of a map that's provided by the Ville de Montréal of the bike lanes that are open for seasons. Open is in air quotes because that just means that they don't actually remove the bike lanes in the winter. It isn't actually a comment on how reliable they are. The major ones generally tend to get cleared quite quickly. So Laurier, Rochelle, Saint-Urbain, Maisonneuve, those ones I know are the ones that get cleared quickly. Probably the new one on Saint-Denis will be reliable. But a lot of the smaller ones in the side streets, sometimes it'll be even up to a week after a snowstorm before those get plowed. So it tends to, you'll figure out which ones get cleared quicker, and hopefully that will help you to plan your route. And this map, which the link will be in the presentation, it's a good place to have a look just to see if the bike lanes will exist there in the winter and they're not one of the ones that get removed.
Yeah. And one thing I would add on that note is that when you're planning out your route, the secondary, like the small residential streets are pretty chill and pretty quiet in the wintertime. But it can be annoying because with the snow buildup and parking, there's not a lot of space for you to cycle and for a car to pass you. So they can be a bit annoying to bike on. Generally, we both prefer to stick to either the main roads or the main bike lanes, simply because we know that they are more likely to be cleared, and we won't have to show up and think like, oh no, it's not really bikeable. We have to like change our route now. So basically in the wintertime, we sort of lock down our routes, our most common routes. We become a bit of creatures of habit, let's say, but it helps us to have a solid route that we know is going to be reliable, and that we can then time how long it's going to take us to get somewhere quite accurately. So even if you really want to avoid going on the roads, chances are at some point you're going to have to take a major road. And if you do, it's good to know what to do in that situation. So I personally don't mind riding on the roads. I found it scary at first, but one thing to remember is that you really want to be where you have the best traction. And unlike in summertime when you're pretty far off to the right, close to the sidewalk, that might not be possible because that tends to be where snow is building up. So what you want to do is ride in the tire tracks of vehicles, which you can see in the photo in the slide of the cyclist, because this is where you're actually going to be meeting pavement with your tires. And one thing that I would say on that note is just don't be afraid to take space. If you're on a major road and you're riding the tire tracks, don't feel that you shouldn't be there. In most scenarios on major roads, there's plenty of room for a car to go around you, and that's totally fine. I think that you do have to be a little bit more assertive in your cycling in wintertime for that reason, but that's fine. Just remember that you're okay to be there and people can go around you.
The biggest physical change when you start riding in the winter is going to be braking and turning. If you've ever driven a car in the winter, it's going to be the same thing. You want to avoid slamming on your brakes. As soon as you do that, your tires will start to slide. So you never really want to lock your wheels. Always, it's going to be a gradual slowing down as much as you can. I like to lower my bike seat by a little bit, maybe just a ½ inch. And that just lets me, if I'm braking and I start to slide, I can put one of my feet down on the ground right away for balance if I have to. Obviously, when you're riding on pavement, that's not something you do. But in the winter, it happens. You'll start to slip and you're able to bring yourself to a stop and get your balance, and then you can start moving again. And then going around corners, again, just slow down and take it a little bit wider when you can. There's no rush to be somewhere if you've given yourself that extra 10 minutes to arrive.
Yeah, planning ahead. Next up is a question that we received from someone who signed up for the workshop, and they asked if we have any tips on cycling in different types of snow. And here are the 4 types of snow that they listed. This is clearly a person who has spent a winter in Montreal before. So first up for that, we have fresh powder. That one's pretty easy. That's kind of like the very, very dry snow that you can like brush away with your hand. With that type of snow, your tire should cut right through it and meet the pavement. So nothing special, shouldn't give you too many problems. Next was slushy conditions. I think that you have like decent control with slushy conditions, but obviously it's really wet. And so you want to have appropriate rain gear, which is something we'll be talking about in the next section. It's also good to note that when things are slushy, if it's like freezing rain conditions, there can be ice underneath all that slush. So just be wary.
And something to keep in mind is, I know when I was going to school and being at school for 10 to 12 hours. If you leave in the morning and things are warm and soft, keep in mind that by the time, if you're going home late at night, things may have frozen by then. So it's a good idea to just keep that in mind. Check the weather before you go out, and then that way you know if it's going to be frozen by the time you're biking again.
Yeah. The third type of snow that this person listed on their question was packed snow, packy snow. This one is my personal least favorite because you have poorer control in packed snow because your tire isn't making as much contact with the pavement. Really what happens is that your wheel stays on top of the snow and it's sliding around and you're not able to make that contact. It is possible to bike in it. It just is a bit more of a balancing act. And then the next one, which also isn't really a joy to bike in, is when the conditions are really iced over. And when this person put this in the questions, I was immediately thinking of the classic Montreal
ice storm of 98.
Yeah, the glazed over streets when you're basically, if you're struggling to walk to your mailbox on the sidewalk, that means that it's probably not a great day to go biking either, unless it's the odd time. And I've seen this happen where the sidewalks are super treacherous. It's really hard for me to like go out and unlock my bike. But then when I look at the street, it's pretty bare for some reason. So one thing that I used to do when I was deciding whether or not I would walk or bike when I was studying at Concordia, I would just like poke my head out the window and look at the main street that I would take and get kind of an idea of what it looked like. Yeah.
Visibility is a big thing in the winter. Drivers tend to be less aware that cyclists will be out. They think we're a little crazy, probably. So it is important to make sure you can be seen. You are legally required to have reflectors. The link for the full details is in the slides here, but the gist is you have to have a white reflector on the front of your bike, a red reflector on the back, white or yellow on the pedals, white or yellow on the front wheel, white or red on the back wheel. And that's a long list. Most bikes will have those. Reflectors are good. You have to have them. More important, in my opinion, is having lights. So especially if you're leaving home early and coming home late, you might be biking in the dark or low light both ways. And having a good set of lights really makes you visible. I now have a car in the city and it's really weird to get used to, but it's really apparent to me now that it is very hard to see cyclists without lights. So I think that is a must. And I think we have some to show.
Yeah, I have some lights to show you because we say that we favor the rechargeable ones. I mean, for a lot of reasons, because they're more environmentally friendly, but also just because they're a lot brighter. It probably won't show up very well in the video, but this is a rechargeable light. And then the ones that you can buy from the dollar store and like dépanneurs at the counter look like this. And they're just not...
they don't last as well and they're not as bright. They do in a pinch, but if you haven't got any yet and you're looking to get some, we would definitely recommend rechargeable ones.
Yeah, these ones just, I noticed a difference when I put them on my bike. They don't really cast any kind of light in front of me. And so I imagine that that is a lot less visible for drivers at night. Okay.
Okay, they're not seeing the lights because they have the slides, but somebody mentioned that you can't see the lights on the video. Basically, just the rechargeable ones are a little bit bulkier. And yeah, they just tend to be a lot brighter. That's the sort of things, I mean, you can get them online. You can get them at MEC. A lot of the bike shops, they carry the rechargeable ones now and not those really small ones. So it's just something to look for if you're looking to get a pair and you don't already have ones.
So next I wanted to talk about what is for me personally the most important part of winter biking, and it's just working on your mental game, aka managing your anxiety. And to be honest, winter biking can take a bit of effort for some people if you're feeling anxious or you're generally an anxious person. My advice for that would be to start small and low risk. Take your bike out to a park or a parking lot. on a snowy day and just practice. You can just be silly about it. You can practice stopping suddenly. You can practice swerving a little. You can even practice falling if you want to, though it's not necessary. And another thing that you can do is you can have a buddy system. So when I was winter cycling, all the years that I was studying, I would sometimes like leave the house with a roommate and we would have the same commute, which was really lucky. But I did find that doing it on days when it was very messy and a little bit intimidating was way easier with a friend with you. And we would do that often. And I found it really helped with the stress of learning how to do it in those first 1 or 2 years. Also on that note, just know your limits, I guess. There are days when everybody calls it and you don't have to bike every single day of the winter to call yourself a winter cyclist. It's totally fine to tap out and say, I don't like these conditions, or I don't have a good feeling about today, and either walk or take the metro. That's completely fine.
And just going back to the going out and practice, where I said about not hitting your brakes too hard, when you go and practice, if you practice in a park, that's something you can do, because then you know what will happen if you do have to brake suddenly. And so obviously don't practice that in the road, but if you practice it in La Fontaine or something, it's a good thing to do, to hit the brakes really hard and just get a feel for how your tires slide in the snow, because that is something that happens.
Yeah, we have many winter nights gone out to a park in the beginning stages and just like practiced doing silly things like bailing into snowbanks because it was kind of fun. But just don't hurt yourself and don't hurt your bike. So now I just want to see, we're going to go on to section 2, which is about clothing. I just wanted to make sure that there's no questions from this section.
And we will do questions at the end for as much time as we have remaining. So if you think of any to do with the first sections, we'll be coming back and we'll answer anything at the end as well. Yeah,
so we're going to switch to the video and we will show you the different types of lights. Yeah.
And yeah, we'll show the lights. Perfect.
So we'll start with the lights before we talk about fashion. Okay, so this is the first type of light that I was talking about, a rechargeable light. So I turn it on and it's pretty bright. I don't really want to look at it directly. That's good. That's what you want for a light. It should kind of hurt a little when you look into it. That's a good sign. And then these two are the kind that you can buy at Dollarama and at dépanneurs at the counter. They're okay if that's all you have, but the light that they cast, it really is not as bright as most of the rechargeable ones. And they also don't last as long. So I wouldn't personally recommend them. I think that if you're gonna have lights, you should have the brightest lights that you can find. And like Tucker mentioned before, you can find these at local bike shops, MEC, quite a lot of different places. We're just answering a question about where we can find a map of the winter maintained bike routes. So yeah, we'll send out a link at the end of the presentation. Okay, so now we're going to show you our winter biking wardrobes.
So one of probably the biggest mistakes that we made starting out is actually dressing too warmly. You'll create a lot of heat from your body by biking, as you know, and that stays true in the winter. And so overdressing is actually just as annoying as underdressing, because you're going to arrive to your destination soaked in sweat.
Even when it's minus 20, I swear, it's a thing. It happens.
Yeah. So our kind of rule of thumb is when you first start out biking, you should be a little bit cold, basically. You don't want to start out warm, and because then you'll end hot. If you start out a little bit chilly, your body will warm up as you go and you'll be comfortable once you're riding. Yeah. Heavy, like the really heavy insulated jackets, and parkas and those sort of things, we don't use. You want to make sure that you can still move. You are still riding a bike, and so you still need to be able to shoulder check. You still need to be able to make sure you can grab your brakes really well and all those things. Yeah. And our three essentials that I think you probably have to have for winter riding is going to be a set of ski goggles or something to cover your eyes, a buff, and a good pair of mittens.
Mm-hmm. And that's on top of like the safety things like a helmet and your lights, obviously. But yeah. So instead of wearing like a really big parka or a really big winter coat, my formula is to wear a raincoat with different layers underneath, different layers for different temperature levels. So basically around, and these are kind of like very personal, so it's going to be different for you, but you'll develop them as you go on. Around -10, I would have like a regular kind of like an acrylic knit sweater or a hoodie and a raincoat. And just to show you, my raincoat has zippers in the armpits, which is really great because instead of having to like stop and take it off, you can unzip an armpit and feel a lot cooler, which is awesome. So again, this is like my stuff for a -10 day. For a -10 day, I would have like my lighter mittens, which are just acrylic, nothing fancy. And I would also wear a tube scarf. And the reason why I would wear a tube scarf and not the kind that wraps around my neck is because with this on, it's still really easy for me to move around and to shoulder check. And one of the mistakes I made during my first season in winter cycling is that I bundled up way too much and I couldn't really move around. And I actually ended up getting a horribly stiff neck from wearing too much protection. Yeah. So to go on to talking about the really cold days. So by really cold, we mean, you know, like -30. And of course you can bike in that weather. It's totally possible. You are going to have heavier gear. In that kind of weather, I will end up wearing like a much heavier wool sweater. So this is like 100% wool. It's super scratchy, but keeps me very warm. And I'll put that underneath my raincoat. I'll wear it with the tube scarf, as I mentioned. And also, Tucker likes to wear a balaclava on -30 days because it protects your face as well.
That would be my go-to. Yeah, this I rarely wear, but it is extremely warm. And I highly recommend if you plan on going out on the really cold days with your set of goggles, which I actually couldn't find mine. So now I'll be in the market for a new pair.
Yeah. Another thing that is really, it's in our 3 essentials, but a buff. So buffs really are, they're just like a tube of thin material. And the reason why I really like it as opposed to a regular toque is that it fits underneath your helmet really well. It doesn't feel bulky. So again, like you're not just like riding your bike like this and so warm and cozy, but unable to move. You don't want that. And then for mitts on -30 days, you want to have the warmest mitts that you can possibly find, essentially. Yeah. I've tried a lot of different things over the years, but the thing that I've stuck with now, I've done like 2 seasons with these mittens.
That's why they're so dirty.
They're very dirty. They're like, they're pretty gross, to be honest, but they're well loved. And they're sheep wool. And I have had them on a -30 and had my hands sweating, which has been great. One thing you want to check when you try to find a pair of mittens that are really warm is that you can still bend your hands enough to break. So again, warmth, but mobility as well.
Mm-hmm. And what I tend to do for my mittens is I haven't got a pair as nice as Marika's, so I double up. So what I wear is one pair, these are just light work gloves, a pretty thin layer, but I tend to wear those underneath a pair of knitted mittens. And for me, that doubling up has always worked really well. Bulky mittens are a little bit harder to do things like unlock your bike in, but at the same time, handling a metal lock in the winter with your bare hands is not pleasant. So with that way, I get to wear my light gloves underneath when I do all the fiddling. And then when I'm riding, I put on my big mittens on top. And I've always found that the 2 layers works really well for me.
Mm-hmm. And I wanted to go back to goggles, ski goggles, just because there are different styles that you can buy. And there's different uses for them. So ski goggles are really good to stop snow from getting in your eyes. So you want to wear them on maybe like -10 days when it's snowing. And because if you have snow going into your eyes while you're cycling, that does happen and you can't see very well. So it's really a safety thing. Like you need to be able to see the road in front of you. But I also wear them on really cold days when it's bright and sunny, because the wind chill factor can be really high then. And basically your eyes will start watering. And that also is terrible because, again, you can't see very well. So ski goggles are great for snowy and messy conditions, but also just extreme cold conditions. And you can buy them. I bought mine at a secondhand store in Montreal. So if you don't want to drop a lot of money on ski goggles, because I think they can be quite expensive, you can look at the secondhand sporting stores and hopefully have some luck there. And one thing you'll want to think about when buying them is whether or not the part along the sides is blocking your peripheral vision, because different models have kind of a thicker side part, and you want to just, if you're able to, I know it's COVID times and you might not be able to, but if you're able to try it on and like check whether or not you can see side to side well, that's a good idea.
A couple of people are asking about wearing glasses under goggles. So some ski goggles, I believe, are designed to be worn with glasses underneath, and so they'll have a little bit more ventilation. You don't ride with your glasses on.
Yeah, I don't ride with my glasses on because.
But I think that would be something to ask when you go to buy them. Someone should be able to help you with that a little bit better.
Yeah, if you're buying them secondhand, you might not be able to find ones that are specifically designed to have glasses under them. But if you go new, you should be able to find some, or you should be able to order them. Yeah.
And then there was another question about handlebar mitts. Again, neither of us have ever used them, but JF in chat said that once you try it, you never go back. So those would be, I believe they're talking about the mittens that kind of fit over your handlebars and you stick your whole hands into. Yeah, I imagine they're really warm.
Yeah.
I've just never gotten around to actually trying them out.
Yeah, nor have I. Maybe this winter. We still haven't talked about rain days at all yet. We've talked about extreme cold, but as you know, Montreal winters, the temperature and everything is always fluctuating. So I've shown you my raincoat already, but you'll probably want a pair of splash pants to ride in, because even if it's on a slushy day, you're going to start getting covered in mud. And I assume that you don't want to show up to your destination covered in mud. So
salt and slush.
Yeah, if you buy a pair of splash pants, these ones are from Mech. They can be kind of expensive, so maybe you can find something at a thrift store. But I do really like these ones, and they keep me 100% dry, which is really good. And I'll only wear them when it's really wet or slushy, because you will be extremely warm with a pair of splash pants on. And if it's raining, that means that you don't need to layer up that much. So on a rain day, I'd probably wear
because that kind of from your knees down to your boots is what gets the most wet from the splash off the road. So gaiters might be a good option too for keeping you a bit drier. Kara says that rain pants are great for days when you want to wear a skirt as well. That's a good point.
I've never biked in the winter wearing a skirt. I should at some point, but and that's one thing that I lament about winter biking a little bit, is that I don't feel like I can get as fancy. But yeah, with layering and with having splash pants, you can like put your nice fun clothes underneath and know that they're quite protected, which is good. Okay. So we're going to switch over to the next section now, which is about maintenance and bike repair. So unless there's any other questions that we haven't answered about, what about shoes? Yeah, I personally don't do anything special for my shoes. However, I know that you can get like pull-on rain cover shoes. I pretty much always wear Blundstones, and then I have my splash pants that go over top of them, and then I don't really have a lot of water getting in. I've also seen people wearing rubber boots on really wet days, which is a good idea, and I've done that in the past. That can be really nice. Yeah, Tucker, what do you normally wear on your feet?
Yeah, I've worn my Blundstones, and then also I've also worn a pair of hiking boots. Sometimes, like for going to class, got a locker and I threw like a pair of sneakers in the locker so I could wear like a pair of leather hiking boots, and then just chuck them in the locker and switch to sneakers. Your feet will get wet, at least on the outside. So something waterproof, slightly waterproof, and something warm is definitely a good call to go with.
Yeah, I think it can be a good idea that if you're working in an office space or something where you have to be a bit more professional, if you're able to keep like a nicer pair of shoes there and wear like a rubber boot or something to your work, that would be great. And also for warmth's sake, I would recommend wearing like a thick wool sock in your feet, because your feet are something that actually do get quite cold. I'd forgotten this actually until this question came up. But I do remember having like, your feet and your hands are the things that get really cold in the winter. So you're going to want like really nice warm socks for those freezing days. Yeah. Okay. Good questions. Thank you.
So talking about bike maintenance.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about bike maintenance. We've got a couple of different topics, but we're going to start with one that came up really frequently when we were getting questions from people, and that is about storage. So the main question is, do I need to store my bike inside? And the answer is no, not necessarily. However, it is preferable. It's a little bit better for your bike if you can store it inside. But we've both done seasons of winter cycling and not had a place to store it inside, and that's totally fine. One thing about storing it outside is that you're going to have to do a little bit of maintenance to your lock. And if you have a U-lock, basically what you want to do is lock your bike with the keyhole, which is here, facing down, which can prevent water from leaking directly into it. Because one of the most annoying things about locking your bike outside is that your lock will freeze from time to time. And what you want to do if that happens is your first thing will be finding a lighter and get some oil into the lock mechanism.
Someone in chat can just make sure that we're still running fine for us. That would be great.
Yeah, so we're having some technical issues.
I guess Johnny says that you can hear and see us now. So hopefully that applies to everyone.
Yeah, so
I think that's the only touchy, but we're going to continue on. And feel free to type in questions if you really miss something, and we'll type the answers back to you for
Guys, the sound is very muffled. We can't really hear you.
okay,
Okay, how's that? That should be better now.
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yes, good. Okay. So I'm gonna
where were we? Ice and locks. Yeah.
Repeat the stuff about ice and locks. Ironic that we
froze
during the time that we talked about that. So starting from the beginning, storing your lock with the keyhole facing down to prevent water from collecting in it. And what will happen if water collects in it is that it will freeze, obviously, which is annoying, but you can fix it. You can either take your key and heat it up with a lighter, and if it's not too bad, then that should work to get your lock unstuck. You can also pour boiling water in your lock into the locking mechanism, into the hole. But just note that you're going to have to let it dry out after that you won't be able to just like slap it back on your bike and then leave it for the day, because you'll have the exact same problem afterwards. And your bike lock, if it's a U-lock, I don't have experience with other locks, but I do know that my U-lock gets pretty stuck in the wintertime sometimes. So it's a good idea to apply the same oil that you use to oil your chain to the locking mechanism.
Just a couple drops right into the keyhole will help to keep it from getting dirty and stuck.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gonna
Next up is
move back to the slide for a minute
and talk about different tires.
Yeah.
That was another one of the most common questions. So right off the bat, slicks and road tires, not ideal. I'm not going to tell you not to use them, but I would definitely strongly recommend against it. What we've both used all winters that we've rode are just road tires, but with heavy tread. So as you can see in the picture there, that's kind of an example. That we have found works well enough. I now leave tires like that on my bike year round. I find even on rainy days in the spring, it's really nice to have that extra traction when you're braking. Just not a huge fan of slicks. I'm not that concerned about going too fast, so it works fine for me. And then the final option would be to get studded tires. So something a lot of people don't realize when they start looking at winter biking is you can actually get tires with metal studs in them, which we have never used, but people we've talked to that have used them have sworn by them and said that they're great. Answering Daniel's question, yes. I think 700, I think mine may have been a little bit wider than 25. I think they might be 700 by 28 or something like that. But yes, you can find heavy treaded tires in that size.
Great. Can you guys read the question and then answer it just for the YouTube watchers?
Absolutely. The question was, so is a road bike size wheel 700 by 25 okay with road winter treaded tires on them, or should I get thicker? And I'm going to say, yeah, that should be fine. That's pretty much what I've used in the past. Most bike shops should carry that size, but with the tread on them, which is good. And then studded tires, the obvious downside with them is they are seasonal. You're going to want to change them again in the spring, which is not a huge deal. And they also tend to be much more expensive. So it depends on your budget and how much you want to outfit your bike for the winter. From what we've heard, they're pretty great.
Yeah. But if you can't afford to get studded tires, a cheaper option will just be getting treaded tires like we have in the photo here, and you should be okay with those. Just try to avoid being or having the really smooth road tires.
Yeah.
Okay, so we wanted to put together a winter toolkit checklist, and it's not very exhaustive. It's just a couple of things that we think that anyone who's doing winter cycling should have at home, because you're going to want to be doing regular cleaning and maintenance. This is sort of how we actually started learning about bike maintenance and repairs and mechanical stuff, was just through having to do it in the winter. So I'm pretty grateful for that, actually. But the things that we recommend is having a wire brush. It doesn't need to be a fancy special bike wire brush like this one. You can go to a hardware store and buy a regular wire brush. And aside from that, rags. And also you're going to want oil for your chain, an adjustable wrench, and then we put in brackets optional for the next two, but lube potentially and WD-40 potentially. Just a note on the different products that we listed. So oil, is what you'll be using on your chain and potentially your derailleur, essentially the moving parts that are exterior on your bike. Lube is used for the moving parts that are interior. So think ball bearings in the bottom bracket, ball bearings in the cones of the wheels. So that's getting into like a bit more advanced repairs. But one thing that we do in spring and fall is we take apart our bottom bracket, and we take apart our wheel hubs, and we clean the ball bearings, and we put in new lube. And that can help them to move more clearly, because after a winter, especially if you're driving an old bike, you will notice that it starts to get a little bit crunchy with all of the ball bearings.
And that cleaning is a much bigger project for sure. So if you don't know a lot about bike maintenance already, that's probably not something you want to get into unless you're keen to learn, in which case we'll have some resources at the end where you can look up videos on how to do that. That cleaning is something that we try to do twice a year, before the winter and after the winter. It just keeps things running smoother. But again, it's a pretty big project to do.
Yeah, it's a big project. A note about WD-40 and what it's used for. So again, I said lube is used for the interior parts, the ball bearings. WD-40, it strips. So it strips rust, and you don't really want to put it on anything like your chain. If you had to, it probably means that your chain needs to be replaced, because if your chain is so rusty that you need to use WD-40 to get it moving, it's probably time to say goodbye to that chain. But just remember that WD-40 strips things. So if you're using WD-40 on any part of your bike, you're going to want to wipe it off afterwards. And the only reason I ever use it is to get unstuck a bolt or a screw that's really, really rusted on. I never really use it on any other part of my bike, but it can be really handy if you have just a random screw on there that's been rusted on for a year or so. That happens to me quite often. I have an old beater bike, so yeah, it can be really useful for that.
So just to go over it really quickly again, because somebody asked, what is the different usage in oil and lube? In a nutshell, oil is for the exterior parts, and the lube's going to go on parts inside of your bike, is the very simplified answer.
Yeah.
So in terms of the frequency of doing cleaning and what you need to be doing, we would say, try and do it once a month. Maybe that's ambitious. We probably haven't done once a month in the past, but we're going to this season. We swear. So what you'd want to do is give your frame a quick clean. Don't use a wire brush to clean anything stuck off your frame, because if you scratch your paint, your frame will start to rust underneath a lot faster. So you only want to wipe your frame with rags. But when it gets to the drivetrain, so the drivetrain is all of your chain and your chain rings and your derailleurs. And that system, which makes your bike go, is also usually the part of the bike that gets the most wear in the winter because it's very exposed. So with that, that's where you're to answer your question about what the wire brush is for, Ellen, is you're going to want to use a wire brush if your chain starts to get rusty, or if your chain or your gears start to get rusty, you can use the wire brush to kind of clean that and scrape it all off. Something we like to do is to rip rags into strips and kind of floss in between your gears. And that is a really quick way of cleaning out all of the crud that gets jammed up in between there. And then once all of that cleaning is done, then you want to re-oil the whole system.
Yeah.
And then in terms of the derailleur, the rear derailleur that's generally the part that I slack on and end up having to replace. The pictures that should be on the screen are kind of highlighting where the main spring is in the derailleur. And that's the important one that keeps your chain, the tension on your chain. And that's the one that'll tend to get filled with salt and dirt, and that spring will seize and stop moving. So cleaning that out, if it starts to stick and getting a little bit of oil on it, is very important to do. And I think we have a really dirty old one that we can hold up to the
so
camera.
We're gonna switch to video here for a sec because I pulled out a really dirty and gross derailleur that I found in the part bucket here, the used part bucket. And I picked it because it looks pretty realistic insofar as what you might find on a bike after it's been through a winter season. There's dirt falling off of it as I'm touching it. But for the sake of demonstrating how to check if your derailleur is in okay shape, I'm going to use a better one because it actually moves. So in the picture that we showed you, there's a spring, the main spring, a big spring. So your derailleur should move and it should spring back. And you can check this on your bike. It is easier if you take it off your bike, but that requires taking off your chain. So if you don't want to go there, that's fine. You can like check these things while it's actually on your bike. And then it also moves in this direction. So this is one way that it moves from one set of springs. And then this is the other way that it moves. And if you're trying to move it and it's so stuck and it's not, if it doesn't spring back like that, that means that you need to probably check out the springs that we featured on the photo. So the largest set of springs, you'll want to get into the springs with a wire brush and just kind of brush off any of the dirt. And you'll want to wiggle it until it starts to feel healthy again, basically until the spring is springing. And you can also use, you mentioned strips of rags that are really great because you can basically use them as if you're flossing, but on your bike. And you can get into different little parts and just like do a really good job of sliding it in and out and around. And this is a really important part of winter maintenance because you have on your derailleur, you've got like two little wheels that turn and they have teeth on them. And if they develop a lot of dirt and rust, it's not going to line up very well with your chain. So if you're noticing that your chain is like slipping around and it's just not feeling very smooth, look on your derailleur and see what it looks like. If it's really dirty, if it's really rusty, try to get in there and clean it as best as you can.
Mm-hmm. The extra friction that all that dirt adds to your bike is just going to make it harder to pedal, and you want to be focusing on other things while you're riding. You don't want it to be a struggle to bike.
Mm-hmm. And the same thing goes for other parts of your bike as well. So it's a little bit far away.
Hold on. So we're going to talk about cables.
Oh, I was actually going to say, just before we go to the cables, that while you're cleaning your derailleur, you can also clean the chain rings on your bike with the exact same tools. So you can use the wire brush and your little flossy rag pieces to clean the chain rings, because the same thing goes for them. If the teeth of the chain rings are filled with rust and dirt, they're not going to line up with your chain very well. And this will all just lead to the better functioning of your bike.
Kara asked if we could show where to oil the spring in the derailleur.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So again, this is off the bike, so it's out of context a little bit, which might be confusing, but where I'm holding it is going to be, double check. Where I'm holding it is where it mounts onto your bike and then moves in this direction. So at this point here where it rotates, that's going to be the spring that gets stuck the most. On Marika's bike behind us, that's got a newer derailleur on it. And so there is actually a plastic case around it, so you can't see it, which hopefully will mean it won't get too dirty this winter.
We hope.
But on these older ones, the spring, this one, it's a little bit blurry, I'm certain. The pictures in the slides will probably explain better. But you're looking for that point that the derailleur rotates, and that's where you'll find that big spring. And that's where you just want to get a few drips of oil on. Mm-hmm. So hopefully that's clear.
And while we're on oil, just so you can see, this is a bottle of oil. It's called 3-in-1. You can buy it at local hardware shops. You'll use this oil for your chain as well. And oiling your chain is, I don't want to say the most important part, but arguably the most important part. And so you're going to want to oil your chain probably about once a month. So whenever you're doing all of these maintenance things, oil your chain. If if your chain is super dirty to begin with or super rusty, try to clean it off first before oiling it.
And then one more spot that's a good idea to get oil in is in your cables. So anywhere where, this is of course not on the bike, but anywhere where a cable goes into the housing, if you don't want to change your cables, it's a good idea to put just a drop of oil at each end where the cable goes into the housing for your brakes and your gears, and then just pump your brakes a few times and it'll work that cable back and forth, and that'll just put a little coating of oil at the entrance to the housing, and it will stop the cable inside from rusting and getting stuck in that housing, and it'll keep your cables and brakes moving really nicely.
And we're going to switch back to the slides for a second because what we're about to show you is a bit easier just with a photo.
Okay, so brakes. There are basically two really different systems of brakes for us to go through, particulars for each one, with pad brakes and disc brakes and hub brakes. So we're basically going to just talk about pad brakes, and within that there's at least 3 different kinds. So we're going to be very general on it. The pad brakes being the most common, we'll talk about those. The biggest thing to keep in mind is that pads wear out a lot faster when they're being used when there's moisture present. That water heats up as you're braking and it tends to wear out the rubber a lot faster than you're used to. It's possible to, I've gone through pads before in a matter of a couple of days when I've been on cycling trips and it's been really rainy. They can wear down that quickly if you're using them a lot. In general, if you have new or new-ish brake pads on your bike, you should be fine for the winter. That being said, it's a good idea to check that. So the picture on the slide shows a brake where there's a wear line labeled on the brake pad. Not every style of pad will have that, but if it does, that's a very good indicator where if your brake is worn down to that point, it's time for you to change them, because as you start wearing beyond that point, there's actually metal inside the pad. That's how it's attached. And you're going to run the risk of actually running that metal of the brake pads against your rims, and that will ruin the rims of your bike, which you really don't want to do. Different styles of brake pads, generally speaking, if they don't have a wear line labeled, it should be quite visible on the outside where the metal is, and you just want to make sure that you're not getting anywhere close to running that instead of the rubber. And then if your pads do wear out over the winter, maybe not to the point of needing to replace them, but they will wear out some and you may need to tighten your brakes. And so we're not going to go over for each type of brakes how you do that, but there is Park's Tool, has a really great YouTube channel, which will include the link at the end. And you can find videos there of basically every type of brake and how you tighten them. That's our go-to when we don't know how to do something.
And
it's often
the first thing that you'll want to do if you're setting out to learn how to tighten your brakes and you've never done it before, just figure out what type of brake you have first. That's the number one thing, and then go from there. You'll be able to find like a really good YouTube tutorial on Park Tool, and yeah, it should be quite straightforward, but really it's just the first part about finding out which kind you have, because there are so many different kinds out there. Next, we're going to talk about fenders, which is also a question that we receive from people. And we have on the slide 2 different types of fenders. We have fitted and straight fenders. I've used both over winter seasons, and I found that fitted is really annoying because a lot of snow and dirt will build up between the fender and the wheel, and that can actually make it a bit harder to ride because your wheel is rubbing against snow, and that's especially a problem in winter seasons when you have a lot of packy snow. Again, I'm on about complaining about how much I don't like packed snow, but c'est la vie. So for that, I would recommend a straight fender or a straighter style instead of the fitted ones, because there will be enough clearance between the wheel and the fender for the snow to not
just
collect.
fall off. Yeah.
Yeah, and with the fitted ones, also like if you do have fitted ones installed and you're not going to get around to putting on different ones, that's fine. Just keep in mind that when you lock your bike at the end of the day, it's a good idea to like remove that snow that's sitting up there between the wheel and the fender so that it's just not sitting all night on it.
Yeah, you want to make sure that the snow isn't getting jammed in your brakes. Alexa asks, what about on the front wheel? Are there straight fenders for front wheels? There are. They don't look exactly like the one that we have in the picture for the back wheel. They mount to your frame. I haven't had them, but I've seen them. So that would be the same sort of thing. It's just, the idea is that it's just farther removed from the wheel so that nothing is getting stuck in between. So those you should be able to get at most bike shops as well. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're in the market for fenders, I would recommend going to a bike shop and telling them that you want to have them for winter and explaining that you want a style that won't cause you to have a lot of snow buildup, and they should be able to point you in the right direction. The main thing is basically that the fender isn't too close to the wheel and too snug like it is on the very fitted ones.
And if you really want to, it's totally possible to make yourself a set of fenders, some duct tape, corrugated plastic, and a few zip ties. That will work just fine if you don't feel like buying them. And it, you know, it's not perfect, but it will keep you drier, and you won't have salt and slush all up your back. So that works just as well.
Yeah, the main purpose of the fender for me is, like he just mentioned, not getting slush and mud on your back, because if you don't have a fender, in the front, you're going to get slush and salt into your eyes and on your face. This has happened to me. I've biked without a fender in the winter, and I would show up to class or wherever I was going, and I would just have like mud smeared on my face and be like, hey, you're really dirty. Yeah, just fenders. They're a good purchase.
Yeah.
And if you can't purchase them, you might be able to DIY them fairly cheaply.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that concludes the presentation. And so are there any questions that we didn't get to in any of the sections that anybody has been holding off on? I'm just going to wait and see if any of them filter in. No questions. I just wanted to address, salt rusting the bike.
Yeah. Yeah, you should see my bike. It's bad. The process of prepping an old frame for winter to really salt proof it is pretty labor intensive if you do it yourself, or pretty costly if you don't. My old frame that I had that was all scratched and rusted didn't look great, but it did function for, I got it through 4 winters, and then I retired it. So yeah, if you have a bike that you really like with a really nice frame, maybe just keep that one for the summer. Otherwise, try not to scratch the paint. Do the best you can not to scratch the paint. And if you want to put the time in, there's tutorials online you could find about sanding rust, stripping the paint, and then doing a coat of primer, and then automobile paint. That's really tough. Yeah, it's a tough one to prevent. If you have scratches in your paint, it will rust.
And one thing that you could do, which is more preventative, I suppose, is that if you want to take the time every single night to use a rag and like wipe off the snow and the salt from your bike, you can do that. Or you can store it inside if you're able to, but cleaning it off can help if you are willing to do it nightly with a rag. Personally, I don't do that. My bike, which is behind us, has quite a bit of rust building up around the,
We're still on slides.
Oh yeah, sorry. I keep forgetting that we're still on slides, but you can't see my rusty bike, and it's probably better that you can't. But it does have a lot of rust. It's still functioning. And I'm comfortable with it. I'll still get quite a few more years out of it. But if you love your frame, then it might be worth getting a winter bike, like a beater, if you're able to.
Okay,
And
we'll scroll through a few more questions here. Daniel says, it's a good idea to pour hot water on the bike after each ride to take off the salt and dirt. I never have. I would worry about if you're pouring water onto it, especially if you're storing it outside afterwards, that water is going to freeze in the moving parts. If you get a lot of liquid water in your derailleurs and such, and sits out overnight, it'll freeze. Whether you're doing that and then storing it inside, it sounds like a lot of work to me. Probably good in the long term. Possibly, again, avoid pouring too much water over the moving parts, because then you're going to have to re-oil them a lot more frequently. But with like warm water on a rag to wipe off the frame, especially on the bottom where the salt collects, that would be, probably wouldn't hurt.
Yeah, I think a rag could be like a little bit easier for you, and probably have the same effect.
Ellen asks recommendations about avoiding slipping apart from braking gently.
Avoiding slipping. I mean, one thing I will say is that I have fallen on my bike winter cycling, especially when I was learning, not to any extent where I really hurt myself, luckily. But I think that this kind of goes into things that we mentioned about going to the park and practicing, because a lot of it really is just muscle memory. I notice that when I'm riding my bike in the winter and I have drop handlebars, so it's a little bit different if you have straight ones, but that I center my gravity like more in my hips. And when my front wheel starts to wobble a little bit, if it's really slippery, I kind of like just let it happen, and I'm more balanced in my core and my center, and not putting as much weight on my handlebars.
Yeah.
And that's a really difficult thing to explain, so I'm sorry if that is not translating well.
Yeah. Slipping for sure is something that will happen, so it's good to know how to respond when things start to slip, and that's something that really you just get by practicing in a low risk situation. Something else to point out is if your back wheel is slipping side to side, that's might be uncomfortable and weird, but that generally is fine. Something you want to watch out for is if your front wheel starts slipping side to side while you're riding. If your front wheel starts to move sideways, you will want to stop right away, because if that wheel slips, you're going to fall over. Again, it's happened to both of us once or twice a year. It's embarrassing. We've never hurt ourselves when it happened. So
yeah, and also what we said about lowering the seat can help there, because when you have that moment where you're like, oh no, I'm losing control, being able to put your foot down really easily and quickly can help you feel more comfortable. And if you're, if you can't just simply brake if the situation is not going to be helped with that.
Yeah. And then a question about if you should get rid of fitted bars and replacing them with straight ones.
Fitted fenders,
fenders, which Kara answered in the chat, but I'll say out loud for the YouTube, is that they are fine if you already have them. We would say, yeah, just keep using them. Just have a look at your brakes and up underneath the fenders and make sure there's not too much snow in there. Yeah. If you notice it's extra hard to pedal, it's probably jammed up with snow, and you'll want to have a look at them.
And also, if it's your first year winter cycling, it's kind of a time to see what works and doesn't work for you. So you might as well try them out, see how you feel, and you can always change your fenders mid-season if you want to. If you just get fed up and annoyed with them, you can change them, but yep. No harm in trying them.
Exactly. And then I think the last question from Gab was, which is better, hot cocoa and whiskey or a hot toddy?
I've been more leaning towards hot cocoa and whiskey lately.
Cocoa. Yeah, I think the hot cocoa.
Yeah. Hot toddy season for me is more in February, I would say. Yeah. We've gotten through most of the questions. I think all of them. Hot toddy all the way. Well, we'll have to come to a consensus at some point about this, clearly. Hot spiced apple toddy.
All right, chat says hot toddy. So
okay. I guess we're on the hot toddies. Official recommendations from us there. Okay. So on our last slide, I'm just going to go back one. A couple of people asked about donations. So you can get the donation link here on the slide. And just to let everyone know, all of the donations go directly to Centro Velo, to helping our shop function, buying the tools that make it possible to do sessions and help people with repairs and do programs like this. And we appreciate any kind of donation. It really doesn't matter to us. It can be $1. We still really appreciate it. Yes, the donation link is there. Feel free to click on it. And then at the very, very end, we have some of the resources that we talked about. So if you're looking to look up YouTube tutorials, Park Tool is really awesome. Also, Sheldon Brown is really awesome. And it's generally not videos, it's like pictures and long text answers. But I'm pretty sure that Sheldon Brown would have something on rust management and frames. I was looking at that myself the other day. So he has something about using automotive paint on rusty frames to help with prevention. And then there's also the Facebook group Vélo d'hiver. And that Facebook group is really awesome because there's constantly people posting workshops about winter cycling. It's basically just all winter cycling things of Montreal. And I follow it, and you'll get like really good tips from people who have been out there a long time doing this. Yeah. And if you have any questions that arise in the next couple of days we didn't get to, feel free to email me. My email address is there at that slide.
And we will send out the presentation. So if you're interested in grabbing those links from there, I'll make sure everyone has it. Yeah. I think that concludes our talk.
Yeah, I think that concludes everything. Thank you to all of our participants, but we have just a couple more questions. So Daniel Smith wants to know if the shop is opened in winter for repairs, and not this winter, no. So we have our last session next weekend, which is booked. Unfortunately, right now we have to be working outside because the workshop isn't big enough to properly social distance. So we'll be opening again in the spring with a similar outside setup. If you've been to any of our sessions this summer that we had starting in July, it'll be the same deal. But over the winter, we're going to be closed, which is unfortunate, but we're going to be back in the spring and ready to help you then. And in the meantime, I know that there are some other bike collectives that are still going to operate through the winter. I think La Remise is going to be open, and if there are any other ones anyone can think of, feel free to put them in the chat, but I know that that's the one that I might go to if I need to do some really serious repairs that can't be done in my living room with a tarp. Mile End Bike Garage, Cara says. Yeah, so,
all right.
So check out those other bike workshops that are going to be open this winter, and we'll be back to help you out in the spring.
Great. Thanks for everyone for tuning in, and be safe this winter.
Yeah, have fun.
Okay, thanks everyone.